Hello, everyone. We are in chapter 11 of Where the Red Fern Grows today. Keep in mind that today is going to be your questions for submission. Every day this week, except for Friday, we are going to be answering 3 questions per chapter. As I read today's chapter, I want you to keep in mind the relationship the 2 hounds have with each other, Old Dan and Little Ann, and keep in mind the relationship that Billy has with his 2 hounds. All right, so we are jumping into chapter 11 today, and let's see what chapter 11 has for us. Here we go. Chapter 11. I had often wondered what old Dan would do if Little Ann got into some kind of predicament. One night, I got my answer. Several days of northern blizzards had been blowing. It was a bad one. The temperature dropped down to 10 below. The storm started with the slow, cold drizzle and then sheets. When the wind started blowing, everything froze, leaving the ground as slick as glass. Trapped indoors, I was as nervous as a fish out of water. I told Mama I guessed it was going to be a storm all winter. She laughed and said, I don't think it will, but it does look like it will last for a while. She laughed. She ruffled up my hair and kissed me between my eyes. This did rile me up. I didn't like to be kissed like that. It seemed that I could practically rub my skin off and still feel it, all wet and sticky, kind of burning. Sometime on the 5th night, the storm blew itself out and it snowed about 3 inches. The next morning, I went to the doghouse. Scraping the snow from the two-way door, I stuck my head in. It was as warm as an oven. That is a simile right there. I got my face washed all over by Little Ann. Old Dan's tail thumped out a tune on the wall. I told him to be ready because we're going hunting that night. I knew the old ringtails would be hungry and stirring, for they had been denned up during the storm. That evening as I was leaving the house, Papa said, Billy, be careful tonight. It's slick down under the snow, and it would be easy to twist an ankle or break a leg. I told him I would, and I wasn't going far, just down back of our fields in the bottoms. Well, anyways, he said, be careful. There'll be no moon tonight, and you're going to see some fog next to the river. Walking through the fields, I saw my father was right about it being slick and dark. Several times I slipped and sat down. I couldn't see anything beyond the glow of my lantern, and I wasn't worried. My light was a good one, and Mama had insisted that I make 2 leather pouches to cover the blades of my axe. Just before I reached the timber, Old Dan shook the snow from the underbrush. With his deep voice, I stopped and listened. He bawled again. The deep bass tones rolled around under the tall sycamores, tore their way out of the thick timber, traveled out over the field, and slammed up against the foothills. There they seemed to break up and die away in the mountains. Old Dan was working the trail slowly, and I knew why. He would never line out until Little Ann was running by his side. I thought she would never get there. When she did, her beautiful voice made the blood pound in my temples. I felt the excitement of the hunt as it ate into my body. Taking a deep breath, I reared back and whooped as loud as I could. A coon ran upriver for a way and then cutting out of the bottoms. He headed for the mountains. I stood and listened until their voices went out of hearing. Slipping and sliding, I started in the direction I had last heard them. About halfway of the foothills, I heard them coming back. Somewhere in the rugged mountains, the coon had turned and headed toward the river. It was about time for him to play out a few tricks, and I was wondering what he would do. I knew it would be hard for him to hide his tail in the snow of the ground, and I realized later that the smart old coon knew this too. As the voices of my dogs grew louder, I could tell that they were coming straight towards me. Once I started to blow out my lantern, thinking that maybe I could see them when they crossed the field, but I realized I couldn't stand a chance of seeing the race in the slump black night. Down out in the mountains, they brought him, singing a hound song on his heels. The coon must have scented me, or seen my lantern. He cut to my right and ran between our houses and me. I heard screaming and yelling from my sisters. My father started whooping. I knew my whole family was out on the porch listening to the beautiful voices of my red hounds. I felt as tall as the tallest sycamore on the riverbank. I yelled as loud as I could again. I heard the squealing of my sisters and the shouts of my father. The deep "oh" of little Ann and the sharp "oh" of little Ann bored a hole in the icky black night. The vibrations rolled and quivered in the icy silence. The coon was heading for the river. I could tell my dogs were crowding him and wondered if he'd make it to the water. I was hoping he wouldn't, for I didn't want a wad of cold water unless I had to do it. I figured the smart old coon had a reason for turning and coming back to the river, and wondered what trick he had in mind. I remembered something my grandfather had told me. He said, "Never underestimate the cunning of the old river coon. When the nights are dark and the ground is frozen and slick, he can pull some mean tricks on the hound. Sometimes the tricks can be fatal." Fatal is a word that is meaning like death. They could die. Fatal. It was halfway through the fog-covered bottoms when the voices of my dogs stopped. I stood still, waited, listened. The cold silence settled over the bottoms. I could hear the snap and crack of the sap-frozen limbs. From far back in the filthy hills and the long, lone howls of the timber wolf floated down into the silent night. Across the river, I heard a cow moo. I knew the sound was coming from the lowery place. Not being able to hear the voices of my dogs gave me an uncomfortable feeling. I whooped and waited for one of them to bawl. As I stood waiting, I realized something was different in the bottoms. Something was missing. I wasn't worried about my dogs. I figured that the coon had pulled some trick and sooner or later they would unravel the trail. But the feeling that something was just not right had me worried. I whooped several times, but still could not get an answer. Stumbling, slipping, and sliding, I started on. Reaching the river, I saw it was frozen over. I realized what my strange, uneasy feeling was. I had not been able to hear the sound of the water. As I stood listening, I heard a gurgling out in the middle of the stream. The river wasn't frozen all the way. It still eddied water next to the banks had frozen, but out in the middle, where the current was swift, the water was running, leaving a trot in the ice pack. The gurgling sound I had heard was a swift current as it sucked its way through the channel. The last time I heard my dogs, they were downstream from me. I walked listening. I hadn't gone far when I heard old Dan. What I heard froze the blood in my veins. He wasn't bawling on the trail or giving the tree bark. It was one long continuous cry. In the deep voice, there seemed to be a pleading cry for help. Scared, worried, and with my heart beating like a turning dash, I started towards the sound. I almost passed him, but with another cry, he let me know he was there. Where he was. He was out on the ice pack. I couldn't see him for a fog. I called him, and he answered in a low whine. Again, I called his name. This time he came to me. He wasn't the same dog. His tail was between his legs and his head had bowed down. He stopped about 7 feet from me. Sitting down on the ice, he raised his head and howled the most mournful cry I had ever heard. Turning around, he trotted back on the ice and disappeared in the fog. I knew something had happened to little Ann. I called her name. She answered with a pleading cry. Although I couldn't see her, I guess what had happened, the coon had led them to the river, running out on the ice. He had leaped across the trout, my dogs. Hot on the trail he followed. Old Dan, a more powerful dog than little Ann, he made his leap. Little Ann had not made it. Her small feet and her small feet had probably slipped on the slick ice, and she had fallen into the icy water. Old Dan, seeing the fate of his little friend, had quit the chase and come back to help her. The smart old coon had pulled his trick, and a deadly one it was. I had to do something. She would never be able to get out by herself. It was only a matter of time until her body would be paralyzed by the freezing water. Laying down my axe, I held my lantern out in the front of me and stepped out on the ice. It started cracking and popping. I jumped back to the bank. Although it was thick enough to hold the light weight of my dogs, it would never hold me. Little Ann whining and begging for help, I went all to pieces and started crying. Something had to be done, and done quickly, or my little dog was lost. I thought of running home for a rope or for my father, but I knew she couldn't last until I got back. I was desperate. It was impossible for me to swim in the freezing water. I wouldn't last a minute. She cried again, begging for one thing I couldn't give her: help. I thought, if only I could see her, maybe I could figure out some way I could help. Looking at my lantern gave me an idea. I ran up to the bank about 30 feet, turned and looked back. I could see the light, not well, but enough for what I had in mind. I grabbed my lantern and axe and ran for the bottoms. I was looking for a stand of wild cane. After what seemed like ages, I found it. With the longest one I could find, I hurried back. After it was trimmed and the limber end cut off, I hung my lantern by the handle of the end of it and started easing it out on the ice. I saw old Dan first. He was sitting close to the edge of the trout, looking down. Then I saw her. I groaned at the plight. All I could see was her head and her small front paws. Her claws were spread out and digging into the ice. She knew if she lost that hold, she was gone. Old Dan raised his head and howled. Hound though he was, he knew it was the end of the trail for his little pal. I wanted to get my line as close to little Ann as I could, but the pole was a good 8 feet short. Setting the lantern down, I eased the pole, and under the handle, I thought, I'm no better off than I was before. In fact, I'm worse off. Now I see when the end comes. Little Ann cried again. I saw her claws slip in the ice. Her body settled lower in the water. Old Dan howled and started fidgeting. He knew the end was close. I didn't exactly know where I started out toward my dog. I had taken only 2 steps when the ice broke. I twisted my body and fell towards the bank. Ooh, I got goosebumps reading this. Just as my hand closed on the root, I thought my feet touched bottom, but I wasn't sure. As I pulled myself out, I felt a numbing coldness creep over my leg. It looked so helpless. It looked so hopeless. There didn't seem to be any way I could save her. At the edge of the water stood a large sycamore. I got behind it, anything to blot out the heartbreaking scene. Little Ann, thinking I had deserted her, started crying. I couldn't stand it. I opened my mouth and called old Dan. I wanted to tell him to come on and we go home, and there was nothing we could do. The words just didn't come out. I couldn't utter a sound. I laid my face against the icy cold bark of the sycamore. I thought of a prayer. I thought of the prayer I had said when I asked God to help me to get these 2 hound pups. I knelt down, sobbing out a prayer. I asked for a miracle which would save the life of my little dog. I promised all the things that a young boy could if only he would help me. Still saying a prayer and making promises, I heard a sharp metallic sound. It jumped up and stepped away from the tree. I jumped up and stepped away from the tree. I was sure the noise I heard was made by a rattling chain of the front end of a boat. I shouted as loud as I could, "Over here! I need help! My dog is drowning!" I waited for an answer. All I could hear were the cries of little Ann. Again, I hollered, "Over here! Over on the bank! Can you see my light? I need help! Please hurry!" I held my breath, waiting for an answer shout. I shivered from the freezing cold in my wet shoes and overalls. A straining silence settled over the river. A feathery rustle swifted in the blackness. A flock of low-flying ducks had been disturbed by my loud shouts. I strained my ears for some sound. Now and then I could hear the lapping slap of the ice-cold water as it swirled its way through the trout. I glanced to little Anne. She was still holding on, but I saw her paws were almost at the edge. I knew her time was short. I couldn't figure out what I had heard. The sound was made by metal striking metal. But what was it? What could have caused it? I looked at my axe. I couldn't have made that sound, as it was too close to me. The noise had come out from the river. When I looked at my lantern, I knew that it had made a strange sound. I had left the handle standing straight upward. I had taken the pole away. Now it was down. For some unknown reason, the stiff wire handle had twisted in the socket and dropped. As it had fallen, it had struck the metal frame, making the sharp metallic sound I had heard. As I stared at the yellow glow of my light, the last bit of hope faded away. I closed my eyes, intending to pray again for help, so I desperately needed. Then, like a blinding red flash, a message of the lantern bored its way into my brain. There was my miracle. There was the way I could save my little dog. In the metallic sound that I've heard were my instructions. They were so plain I couldn't help but understand them. The bright yellow frame started flickering and dancing. It seemed to be saying, "Hurry, you know what to do." Faster than I ever moved in my life, I went to work. With the stick, I measured the water in the hole where my feet had broken through the ice. I was right. My foot had touched the bottom. 18 inches down, I felt soft mud. With my pole, I fished the lantern back to the bank. I took the handle off, straightened it out, and bent the hook on one end. With one of my shoelaces, I tied the wire to the end of the cane pole. I left the hook sticking out about 6 inches beyond the end of it. I started shouting encouragement to little Anne. I told her to hang on and not to give up, for I was going to save her. She answered with a low cry. With the hook stuck in one of the ventilating holes of the top of my light, I lifted it back on the ice and set it down. After a little wiggling and pushing, I worked the hook loose and laid the pole down. I took off my clothes, picked up my axe, and stepped down into the hole in the icy water. It came to my knees. Step by step, breaking the ice with my axe, I waded out. The water came to my hips and then to my waist. The cold bit of it took my breath away. I felt my body grow numb. I couldn't feel my feet and all, but I knew I was moving. When the water reached my armpits, I stopped and worked my pole toward little Anne. Stretching my arms out as far as I could, I saw that I was still a foot short. Closing my eyes, gritting my teeth, I moved on. The water reached my chin. So Billy is in this really cold, frozen cold water, and he's trying to reach little Anne with all he has. I was close enough. I started hooking the collar of little Anne. Time after time, I felt the hook almost catch. I saw I was fishing on the wrong angle. She had settled so low in the water I couldn't reach her collar. Raising my arms above my head so the pole could be at a slant, I kept looking and praying, hooking and praying. The seconds ticked by. I strained for one more inch. The muscles in my arm grew numb from the weight of the pole. Little Anne's claws slipped again. I thought she was gone. At the very edge of the ice, she caught again. All I could see now were her small red paws and her nose and eyes. By old Dan's actions, I could tell he understood he had wanted to help. He ran over close to my pole and started digging at the ice. I whooped him with the cane. This was the only time in my life I ever hit my dog. I had to get him out of the way so I could see what I was doing. When I thought my task was impossible, I felt the hook slide under the tough leather. It was none too soon. As gently as I dragged him over to the rim of the ice, at first I thought she was dead. She didn't move. Old Dan started whining and licking her face and ears. She moved her head and started talking to her. He moved She moved her head. I started talking to her. She made an effort to stand but couldn't. Her muscles were paralyzed and the blood had long since ceased to flow. At the moment of little Ann, old Dan threw a fit. He started barking and jumping. His long tail fanned the air. Still holding onto the pole, I tried to take a step backward. My feet wouldn't move. The cold, gripping fear came over me. I thought my legs were frozen. I made another effort to lift my legs. It moved. I realized that the feet were stuck in the soft, muddy bottoms. I started backing out, dragging the body of my little dog. I couldn't feel the pole in my hands. When my feet touched the icy bank, I couldn't feel that either. All the feeling in my body was gone. I wrapped little Ann in my coat and hurried into my clothes. With the pole, I fished my light back. Closed by the large drift, I climbed up to the top of it and dug a hole down through the ice and snow until I reached the dry limb. I poured half of the oil in my lantern down into the hole and dropped a match. In no time, I had a roaring fire. I laid little Ann close to the warm heat and went to work. Old Dan washed her face, washed her head with his warm red tongue while I massaged and rubbed her body. I could tell by her cries the blood started circulating. Little by little, her strength came back. As I stood her on her feet and started walking her. She was weak and wobbly, but I knew she would live. I felt much better and breathed a sign of relief. After drying myself the best I could, I took the lantern handle from the pole and bent it back to where its original position and put it back on the lantern. Holding the light out in the front of me, I looked at it. The bright metal gleam of the fire glow in the fire glow. I started talking to it. I said, "Thanks, old lantern, more than you'll ever know. I'll always take care of you. Your globe will always be clean and there never be any rust or dirt in your frame." I knew for it had not been for the miracle of the lantern, my little dog had met her death on that night. Her grave would have been the cold, icy waters in the Illinois River. Out in the river, I could hear the water gurgling through the ice trout. It seemed to be angry. It hissed and growled as it tore its way through the channel. I shuddered to think what could have happened. Before I left for home, I walked back to the sycamore tree. Once again, I said a prayer. But this time, the words were different. I didn't ask for a miracle. In every way a young boy could, I said thanks. My second prayer wasn't said just with words. All my heart and soul was on it. On the way home, I decided not to say anything to my mother and father about little Ann's accident. I knew it would scare Mama and she might stop my hunting. Reaching my house, I didn't hang the lantern in its usual place. I took it to my room and set it in the corner with the handle standing up. The next morning, I started sneezing and came down with a terrible cold. I told Mama I had gotten my feet wet. She scolded me a little and started doctoring me. For the 3 days and nights I stayed home, all this time I kept checking the handle of my lantern. My sisters shook the house from the roof to the floor with their playing and romping, but the handle never did fall. I went to my mother and asked her if God answered prayers every time one was said. She smiled and said, "No, Billy, not every time. He only answers the ones that are said from the heart. You have to be sincere to believe in him." She wanted to know why I asked. I said, "Oh, I just wondered and wanted to know." She came over and straightened my suspenders, saying, "That was a very nice question for my little Daniel Boone to ask." Bending over, she started kissing me. I finally squirmed away from her, feeling as wet as a dirt dauber's nest. My mother never kissed me like a fella should be kissed. Before she was done, I was kissed all over. It always made me feel silly and baby-like. I tried to tell her that the coon hunter wasn't supposed to be kissed that way, but Mama never could understand the things like that. I stomped out of the house to see how my dogs were. All right, so that is the end of chapter 11. Very good. Had me with goosebumps all over because of the situation. that Billy had saw little Ann in. He felt helpless for a bit, but then he turned to prayer and something came to mind. And he was finally able to get her out, save her life, and warm her up back to safety. Very interesting chapter. I cannot wait to see what chapter 12 has for us tomorrow. Every chapter holds something so interesting, and it always has me wanting the next chapter. So I will see you tomorrow for chapter 12. Keep in mind the questions will be posted to class tag. 3 questions a day for each chapter. Any questions, let me know. Till then, I'll see you tomorrow.